A man stands in the flickering light, his hands shaking. The blade in his grasp drips red. In front of him, a lifeless body, his wife, his concubine. He doesn't weep, he doesn't tremble in sorrow. Instead, he does something unthinkable. With every cut, a gruesome message is sent. 12 pieces, 12 tribes, a horror so shocking it sparks a war that nearly destroys an entire nation. This is the most disturbing story in the Bible you were never told. Prepare yourself, because once you hear this story, you'll never see the Bible the same way again. Chapter 1. A woman who tried to escape. She had made up her mind. She couldn't stay here anymore. Whatever had happened between them, whatever had driven her to this moment, it didn't matter now. The only thing that mattered was escape. The man she had once trusted, the man who was supposed to protect her, lay just a few feet away. And yet she felt safer in the night's cold embrace than beside him. She hesitated, her breath shallow, her heartbeat racing. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the wooden latch on the door. A floorboard creaked beneath her weight. She froze. Had he heard her? Was he waking up? Was this the moment her plan failed? A long pause. The Levite shifted slightly, but did not wake. The woman exhaled softly and continued, and then she slipped out into the night. She moved quickly, staying in the shadows. Her sandals barely made a sound against the packed dirt. She glanced back, once, twice, expecting at any moment to hear his voice calling out after her, demanding her return. But the house remained silent. She didn't look back again. She couldn't afford to, not now, not when freedom was so close. The winding road stretched ahead, illuminated only by the pale light of the moon. Her breath was visible in the cool night air. She pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders, her pace quickening. She didn't have money. She didn't have supplies. But she had something stronger, desperation, and desperation was enough to keep her moving. Shadows flickered between the trees lining the road. A distant howl of a jackal sent a shiver down her spine, but she didn't stop. Her feet ached, but she didn't stop. Her body begged her to rest, but she didn't stop. Step after step, mile after mile, she pressed on toward the only place she knew she could go. Her father's house in Bethlehem. The sun was beginning to rise when she finally saw it. The familiar stone walls of her childhood home. Her body was exhausted, but relief pushed her forward. She made it. She was safe for now. She stumbled forward, her knees nearly giving out. A figure rushed from the doorway, her father. His eyes widened as he caught her in his arms, pulling her inside. But was this really safety, or was it only the calm before the storm? Her father closed the door behind them, bolting it shut. He looked over his daughter, concern etched deeply into his face. But there was something else in his eyes too, something like fear. Chapter 2. A forced reconciliation. 4 months passed, 4 months of silence, and then he came for her. The pounding on the wooden door was not the gentle knock of a husband seeking his wife. It was loud, demanding. It echoed through the walls of the small house like a judge's gavel striking down a final sentence. Inside, the woman sat frozen, hands clenching her cloak. She had known this day would come. Every night, she had lain awake, wondering when she would hear that knock, and now it was here. Her father, standing near the fire, turned toward the door, but didn't move immediately. He hesitated. His fingers twitched. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but no words came. The knock came again, louder this time. She turned to her father, her eyes pleading, but he did not look at her. Slowly, carefully, he walked to the door, placing his hand on the latch. His breath caught in his throat. Then, with a deep exhale, he pulled it open, and there he stood, the Levite. His face was unreadable, shadowed by the hood of his cloak. His eyes, cold and searching, landed on the woman immediately. He did not greet her. He did not call her name, no apology, no plea, just a presence that filled the entire space with silent expectation. The father forced a smile, a nervous, thin-lipped smile. "Come in," he said quickly, stepping aside. The Levite did not thank him. He simply entered, his sandals brushing against the stone floor as he moved inside. He looked around, eyes flicking from the crackling fire to the small wooden table, to the woman, who had lowered her gaze, refusing to meet his eyes. For the first time in months, she was within his reach, and yet he did not speak to her. Instead, the father hurried to pour drinks, his movements too quick, too eager. He filled the clay cups with wine, his hands shaking slightly as he placed one in front of the Levite. "Drink," he urged, forcing a chuckle. "You must be tired from the journey." The Levite did not thank him. He lifted the cup, took a long sip, and set it back down. His gaze never left the woman. The father poured more wine, talking incessantly. "Stay the night," he said, almost too quickly. "You've come all this way. Surely you need to rest before your journey back home." The Levite did not reply. He simply took another sip. The woman remained silent. Her hands lay motionless in her lap, folded neatly like those of a servant awaiting orders. She had not spoken a word since he arrived. Her father continued talking, trying to fill the space with meaningless words, as if words alone could stall time, could keep his daughter here for just one more night. Another drink, another cup filled, another laugh forced. The Levite let him continue. And then, just as the tension seemed to settle, the Levite placed his cup down with a soft thud and spoke his first words. "I'm taking her with me." The room fell silent. The fire crackled. A distant dog barked somewhere outside, but inside the small home, it was deathly still. The woman did not look up. She knew her father would fight for her. He would not let her leave. He had kept her here for months, stalling, refusing to send her back. He would not give her up so easily. But to her horror, her father simply poured another drink. "Not tonight," he said, a nervous chuckle escaping his lips. "Rest first. Eat. Stay just one more night." One night became two. Two became three. Each morning the Levite prepared to leave, and each time the father insisted, pleaded for him to stay. He spoke of bad omens, of dangerous roads, of the need for a final meal together. Each night they ate, they drank, and the woman remained silent. She had not spoken since he arrived. And then, on the fifth day, the Levite had had enough. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The father, mid-sentence, froze, his cup still raised halfway to his lips. The Levite looked at the woman. His voice was firm, final. "We're leaving. Now." She did not move. She did not protest, perhaps because she knew it wouldn't matter. The father opened his mouth as if to object, but the words never came. This time he knew there was no use. The Levite extended his hand toward the woman, not gently, not lovingly, just expectantly. She hesitated, and then, slowly, she rose. She followed him without a single word. Her father watched them go, his face heavy with fear. And as they left Bethlehem, the streets behind them stood eerily silent, like a graveyard waiting for its next body. Chapter 3. The City That Refused Them. Night was falling. The road stretched endlessly before them, swallowed by the creeping shadows of dusk. The wind carried a dry chill, whistling through the rocky hills. The Levite led the way, walking with purpose but little urgency, his eyes locked straight ahead. Behind him, the concubine followed in silence. Their servant trudged at the rear, leading the weary donkey. The woman's steps were heavy. Every muscle in her body ached from the journey, and her throat burned with thirst. She wanted to ask how much farther they had to go, but she didn't. She had spoken so little in the past days that words felt foreign in her mouth. Ahead, the darkened silhouette of a walled city loomed against the dying light. "Jabus," the servant's voice broke the silence. "Master, should we stop here for the night?" The Levite slowed, but did not turn around. His voice was cold, dismissive. "This isn't an Israelite city. We can't trust foreigners." He pressed forward. The woman lowered her head and followed. She didn't know whether to feel relief or dread. Jebus fell behind them, its gates shrinking into the horizon. Darkness deepened. The cold grew sharper, and the road stretched on. They walked and walked and walked, and then, at last, another city appeared in the distance, Gibeah, a city of their own people. The Levite exhaled sharply, as if he had finally found safety. He did not know that he had just led them into something far worse. They entered the city. Gibeah should have been alive with movement, a place where travelers like them would find welcome. But something was wrong. The streets were eerily empty, not a single merchant. No children playing in the alleys, no voices calling from doorways, just the wind whispering through the stone passageways. The woman's skin prickled. As they walked deeper into the city, doors quietly shut around them. Figures moved behind wooden shutters. Eyes peered through cracks in the walls, then disappeared as quickly as they came. No one spoke, no one came out. Not a single person took them in, not one. And in ancient times, that meant danger. The Levite's steps slowed. He glanced around, his brow furrowing. "We should leave," the servant muttered. "Something is wrong here." But they had already walked too far. They had already been seen. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. An old man. His clothes were dusty from travel, his skin weathered by the sun. His hands trembled slightly as he stepped forward. He was not a local, his accent was different. He was a stranger like them, and yet he was the only one willing to speak. "Where are you headed?" the old man asked. The Levite straightened, his voice firm. "We are passing through. We only need a place to rest for the night." The old man's face darkened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Don't stay in the square tonight." A warning, a plea. The Levite stared at him, unreadable. He said nothing. The old man's gaze flicked to the woman, his face tight with something like pity or fear. Then, without another word, he gestured for them to follow. He led them to his home, his steps quick, urgent. And when they crossed the threshold, the old man locked the door behind them. Chapter 4. A nightmare begins. The night was silent. Inside the old man's house, the fire flickered weakly, casting restless shadows across the walls. The Levite sat still, his eyes unreadable, his hands resting motionless in his lap. The concubine curled up in the corner, her arms wrapped around herself. The old man paced near the door, his movements uneasy, his breath shallow. He kept glancing at the entrance, his fingers twitching at his sides. Something about this city, about this night, felt wrong. Then a knock, loud, sharp, a sudden, brutal pounding that made the walls tremble. The woman flinched, the old man froze, and then voices. Men's voices, slurred, aggressive, filled with cruel amusement. "Send him out!" they called. "Send out the traveler!" Another pound on the door, harder this time. The wood rattled under their fists. The Levite did not move. He sat completely still, his expression blank, his breathing even. The old man turned toward him, his face pale. "They don't want money," he whispered. His voice shook. "They don't want food." The woman's breath caught in her throat as she stared at him, a terrible understanding dawning in her eyes. "They want him!" The pounding grew louder. More voices joined in, a chorus of demands. "Send him out! Let us have our way with him!" The old man's hands trembled. He turned to the Levite, his voice now desperate. "I won't let them take you." He turned back toward the door, his breath coming fast and shallow, and then he made a decision. A terrible, unthinkable decision. "Please, my brothers," his voice cracked under the weight of fear. "Don't do this wicked thing. Don't dishonor a man under my roof." The voices did not stop. The knocking became pounding. Fists against wood. Laughter. taunts. The old man's breath quickened, and then he did something horrific. He pleaded again, but this time not for the Levite's safety. "Take my daughter instead," he gasped. "Take his concubine, but leave the man alone." The woman's head snapped up. She had been silent for days. But now she let out a soft, strangled sound, a whimper. The Levite finally moved. But not to protect her, not to fight, not to stop what was happening. He grabbed her wrist. She yelped, jerking away instinctively, but his grip was firm, cold, unshaken. And then he dragged her toward the door. She fought him, her feet slipping against the stone floor. She reached out, toward the old man, toward the servant, toward anyone, but no one moved. She tried to plead, but no words came out. And then the door flew open. A blast of cold night air hit her skin. Her cloak twisted around her ankles, and then he threw her outside. The door slammed shut behind her, a beat of silence. Then the screams. All night they tortured her. All night her cries filled the streets, echoing through the cold, empty city. Inside, the Levite sat in silence. His face was expressionless. His hands remained motionless in his lap. He did not move. He did not weep. He did nothing. Chapter 5. The Silent Morning. The first light of dawn stretched over Gibeah, spilling through the narrow streets, washing the stone buildings in cold, indifferent light. The city stirred awake. Merchants unlatched their doors. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Hushed voices murmured, as if the weight of the night still lingered in the air. But in front of one house, everything remained still. The wooden door creaked open. The Levite stepped out. His face was blank, his eyes heavy from sleep but absent of any emotion. He inhaled deeply, stretching his arms, as if this were just another morning, just another journey. And then he looked down. She was there, his concubine, lying at the threshold, motionless. Her arms outstretched, her fingertips barely brushing the wooden doorframe, as if in her final moments she had still been reaching for safety. Her body was twisted unnaturally, bruised and broken, the fabric of her garments torn and stained. The wind stirred the dust around her, catching in her hair. The Levite stared at her. Did he rush to her side? Did his heart stop in his chest? Did he whisper her name in disbelief? Number. He stood over her, cold and silent, his expression unreadable. His gaze swept across her like she was a problem to be dealt with, an object to be retrieved. Not a woman, not a person, just something that belonged to him. He exhaled sharply, almost impatiently, and then he spoke the only words he would ever say to her. "Get up. Let's go." The command hung in the air, absurd in its cruelty, a demand, not a plea, as if she were merely resting. As if she could still rise, straighten her cloak and follow him like before, but she didn't move. She would never get up again. He waited, stared, and then sighed, not in grief, not in rage, but in irritation. He crouched down, his fingers wrapping around her arm. Her skin was cold, limp, unresisting. With a single motion, he hoisted her up. There was no tenderness, no hesitation, just effortless, detached force. Her body slumped lifelessly against him as he carried her to his donkey, her arms dangling, her head lolling to the side. Without a word, he threw her across the back of the animal like a sack of grain, securing her limp form with rough, practiced movements. She did not stir. She would never stir again. He climbed onto the donkey, took the reins in his hands, and rode away. He never looked back. The streets of Gibeah remained still. The wind whispered through the alleys. The doors of houses cracked open just enough for eyes to peer out, watching, silent, unmoving. No one stopped him. No one spoke. The city carried on as if nothing had happened. Chapter 6. The Gruesome Message. The Levite rode in silence, his face unreadable, his hands firm on the reins. The barren landscape stretched endlessly before him, the sky above heavy with grey clouds. The air was thick, unmoving, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The donkey moved slowly, burdened by the lifeless body slumped over its back. Her arms dangled limply, her fingers grazing the dust-covered ground. Her tangled hair hung like shredded silk, swaying lifelessly with each step. The fabric of her torn garments flapped against her bruised skin, exposing the evidence of her suffering. He never looked back at her, never adjusted her position, never whispered a word. Hour after hour he rode. The roads twisted through the wilderness, past villages and settlements. In the distance, children played, women carried water, men tilled fields. Life continued, oblivious to the horror he carried. He passed through towns where people turned their heads, seeing the donkey, seeing the shape upon it, but saying nothing. Perhaps they thought she was merely asleep. Perhaps they did not care. Finally, the journey ended. He was home. But he did not cry. He did not kneel in mourning. He did not prepare a burial. Instead, he went inside. With slow, deliberate movements, he climbed down from the donkey. Without hesitation, he reached for her lifeless form, gripping her as though she were nothing more than an object, a burden to be managed. Her body was dead weight in his arms as he pulled her from the beast. Her feet dragged across the dirt, her head lolled unnaturally to the side. He stepped inside, the dim candlelight casting eerie shadows across the walls. The air inside was stagnant, suffocating, heavy with the silence of what was about to happen. The wooden door creaked as it shut behind him, enclosing them in absolute stillness. And then he dropped her. Her body landed with a sickening thud on the cold stone floor, sprawled, lifeless. For a long moment, he just stared. No emotion, no hesitation. Then, with steady hands, he picked up a knife. The firelight flickered, the reflection of the blade glinting in his hollow eyes. His shadow stretched long across the walls, distorted, monstrous. He did not pray. He did not hesitate. He simply raised the knife and brought it down, a flash of silver, a brutal slice, flesh severed, again and again and again, 12 times. The screen flashes red with every cut. The sound of steel tearing through muscle and bone, the wet, sickening thud as each severed limb fell beside him. The room stank of iron, the warmth of fresh blood spreading in dark pools across the floor. And still, his face remained blank. One piece, then another. 12 in total, one for each of the tribes of Israel, one for each leader who would see this and understand. Carefully, methodically, he wrapped each piece in cloth, the fabric quickly darkening as it absorbed what remained of her. He tied them with rope, securing them like parcels, as if they were nothing more than ordinary deliveries. And then he sent them. Across the land, the gruesome packages arrived, carried by messengers with no knowledge of what they bore. One by one, the elders of Israel unwrapped their parcels. The first elder's hands trembled as he pulled back the stained fabric, revealing something unspeakable. His breath hitched, his vision swam. He staggered back, knocking over his chair. Another elder unfolded the cloth slowly, his lips parting in disbelief, his fingers tightening around the object inside, his face twisted in horror. A third dropped to his knees, hands shaking violently, his throat tightening with shock. He could not speak, he could not breathe. Some recoiled, some wept, some turned away, unable to look. Some clenched their fists, fury rising in their chests. But the message was clear, a call for vengeance, a demand for justice, and soon there would be war. Chapter 7. A Nation in Fury. The elders of Israel gathered in an emergency council. Tension hung thick in the air, the room dimly lit by flickering torches. Seated in a wide circle, the leaders of the 12 tribes looked down at what lay before them. The severed remains of the woman, carefully wrapped, now unwrapped, staining the floor red. The stench of dried blood filled the chamber. Some elders sat in stunned silence, unable to look. Others clenched their fists, jaws tight, rage simmering beneath their breath. A few whispered to one another in hushed, horrified tones. Then someone spoke. Who did this? The question cut through the silence like a blade. The elders turned their heads toward the man standing in the center of the assembly, the Levite. His face was solemn, his stance firm, his voice heavy with the weight of practiced grief. "It was the men of Gibeah," he declared, his tone measured, controlled. "They are the ones who did this wicked thing. They humiliated me. They abused her until she died." A murmur rippled through the room, anger igniting in the eyes of the leaders. The Levite paused, just long enough to let the outrage build. He spoke of the night in the old man's house, of how they had come for him, of how they had defiled her, of how he had woken in the morning to find her broken at his doorstep. He painted himself as the victim, a man wronged, a man whose concubine had been stolen and slaughtered before his eyes. But he never mentioned that he had pushed her outside. He never admitted that he had thrown her to them. He never took responsibility. And as the council sat in stunned silence, the weight of his words shifted from sorrow to fury. "This crime must not go unpunished," one elder growled, his knuckles white as he gripped the hilt of his sword. "If such evil is allowed to remain among us, none of us are safe." Another elder rose to his feet, his voice booming across the assembly. "Then let us rise against Benjamin. Let us burn this wickedness from Israel." The chamber erupted. Shouts filled the air. Chairs scraped against the stone as men stood in unison. Fists slammed against wooden tables. The fire in the center of the room crackled wildly, reflecting in the burning eyes of the leaders. Torches were lit. Weapons were drawn. This was no longer a council. This was a war cry. They would march on Gibeah. They would wipe out the wickedness from their land. And for the first time since arriving, the Levite allowed himself the smallest of smirks. Chapter 8. The War That Nearly Destroyed a Tribe. What started as a call for justice became something far more terrible. The Israelites did not march to Gibeah seeking punishment or retribution. They came to annihilate. The army of Israel was vast, a force of thousands upon thousands, a storm of warriors moving as one. Their weapons gleamed under the sun, their shields locked in unbreakable formation, their hearts burning with righteous fury. The crime committed in Gibeah had been too great to forgive. They would not allow such wickedness to exist within their nation. Benjamin had to be wiped out. The first battle was brutal. The Benjamites, outnumbered but fierce, fought like lions backed into a corner. Their warriors were skilled, their swords sharp, their arrows precise. Against all odds, they drove the Israelites back, sending them fleeing in humiliation. For a moment, it seemed Benjamin might stand, but Israel would not accept defeat. They regrouped, they planned, and when they returned, they came with fire. The Benjamites were lured out of their city, tricked into believing they could defeat their enemy again. But as they rushed into battle, the Israelites had already set their trap. From the hills, from the valleys, from every side, the Israelite army emerged. The Benjamites were no longer hunters, they were prey. And then, behind them, fire. Gibeah, their stronghold, their home, was burning. The black smoke curled into the sky, the crackling flames devouring stone and wood alike. The warriors of Benjamin turned, horror filling their eyes as they saw their city consumed. The battle had already been lost, and they had never even realized it. Panic spread through their ranks, their swords still clutched in trembling hands, their feet frozen as they watched their families. Their wives, their children, their elders, trapped within the inferno. And that was when Israel struck. The warriors of Benjamin, once so strong, so proud, were overwhelmed. They were surrounded, cut down where they stood, their swords clashing desperately, their armor splattered with the blood of their own. And then the true slaughter began. Israel did not stop with the warriors. They tore through the land like an unstoppable force of destruction, leaving nothing but death in their wake. The rage that had driven them to war became something uncontrollable, something monstrous. It was no longer about justice. It was extermination. Men were dragged from their homes and run through with spears. Women screamed as soldiers set fire to their houses, the flames consuming everything in sight. Children clung to their mothers, but there was nowhere left to run. The fields burned, the streets were slick with blood, the rivers ran red. Entire cities fell in a single day. Entire families, entire generations were wiped from the face of the earth. And then there was silence. The land of Benjamin, once thriving, once powerful, was no more. Except for 600 men, bloodied, gasping for breath, their faces streaked with ash and dirt, they ran. They did not stop to look back. They did not stop to mourn. They ran for the mountains, for the caves, for any place where the shadows might hide them from the fate that had swallowed their people whole. 600 men, no wives, no children, no families, no future. The last of Benjamin had been reduced to a few desperate survivors hiding like hunted animals, and Israel standing in the smoldering remains of Gibeah, the corpses of an entire tribe at their feet, realized too late what they had done. Chapter 9. A regret too late. The fires had burned out. The screams had faded. The swords, once lifted in righteous fury, now hung limply in the warriors' hands. Smoke still rose in thin, winding trails from the ruins of Gibeah, curling into the sky like whispers of the dead. The stench of blood and ash lingered in the air, clinging to the clothes of the men who had stood at the front lines. The battlefield, once alive with the chaos of war, was now a graveyard of silence. And then the weight of it all came crashing down. The Israelites looked around them, taking in the absolute devastation they had caused. The bodies, the lifeless streets, the places where homes once stood, now nothing more than charred skeletons of wood and stone. They had set out to bring justice, to cleanse evil from among them, to make an example of Benjamin, but they had gone too far. The rage that had driven them into battle had blinded them to the reality of what they had done. And now, as they stood amidst the ashes, the full horror of their actions settled into their bones. They had not just punished Benjamin, they had nearly wiped them from existence. The war had been so fierce, so absolute, that there was barely anything left. No wives, no children, no future. And suddenly, they panicked. Men who had once roared for blood now stood in stunned silence. Their hands, once clenched around swords, now covered their faces in despair. The war drums had stopped, but the ringing of what they had done echoed in their souls. "We have destroyed one of our own," one elder whispered, his voice shaking. The council gathered, but there was no celebration, no victory feast. The leaders sat in silence, their eyes hollow, their hands gripping their heads. Some paced, muttering in disbelief. Others simply stared ahead as if waiting to wake from a nightmare. "What have we done?" one of them murmured. Another clenched his fists, his voice thick with regret. "How do we fix this?" But there was no answer. Meanwhile, in the mountains, the last of the Benjamites hid like hunted animals. 600 men, no wives, no children, no city to return to. They crouched among the jagged cliffs, their faces gaunt, their bodies weak from hunger. Their armor, once polished and strong, was dented, streaked with dirt and dried blood. Their hands trembled, not from battle, but from exhaustion. They were survivors, but of what? Their people were gone, their homes were gone. Their name, once mighty, once feared, was now a whisper on the wind. And as they sat in the shadows of the mountains, hungry, exhausted, afraid, they did not know whether they had escaped a war or a slow death. And back in the ruins of Israel's council halls, the elders of the tribes whispered among themselves, trying to solve the impossible. How do you restore a people you have almost erased? Chapter 10. A Twisted Solution. The Israelites had destroyed the tribe of Benjamin. That much was clear. Their war had been absolute, their anger unrelenting, their judgment final. And yet, now that the smoke had settled, now that the land was silent, and the dead had been counted, a new terror dawned on them. They had sworn an oath, a sacred vow before God. No man among them would ever give his daughters to the tribe of Benjamin, not after what had happened, not after the war, not after the horrors they had seen. But then came the realization. They had not just punished Benjamin, they had sentenced them to extinction. 600 men remained, no wives, no children, no way to rebuild. And now, bound by their own oath, the Israelites had left them with a fate worse than death. A slow, empty erasure from history. And so, in a disturbing twist, they found a solution. If they could not give the Benjamites their daughters, then perhaps they could let them take them. The plan was born in whispers, spoken in dark corners, in voices laced with guilt and desperation. They could not break their vow. They could not hand over their daughters willingly. But there was another way. They would allow Benjamin to steal their wives. It was a festival, one of the sacred celebrations in Shiloh. Every year, the young women of Israel would come to dance in the fields, a celebration of joy, of life. This year, however, it would be something else entirely. A trap. The Israelites gathered in secret, watching from the shadows as the women of Shiloh danced in the open fields. Their laughter echoed through the valley, their feet moving with grace, their arms lifted toward the heavens. They had no idea what was about to happen. And then, the signal. The Benjamites rushed from their hiding places. Like wolves descending upon unsuspecting prey, they stormed into the festival, their eyes wild, their movements desperate. Screams pierced the night. Girls turned to run, only to be grabbed, lifted, thrown over shoulders like prizes in a game they had never agreed to play. The warriors of Benjamin clung to their captives with an iron grip, dragging them away from their homes, their families, their lives. Some of the women fought, kicked, screamed. Others stood in stunned, paralyzed silence, tears streaming down their faces as they realized what was happening. By the time the festival was over, the fields were empty. The women were gone. The last of the Benjamites had stolen their wives. And now, whether they wanted to or not, they would rebuild their shattered tribe. And far from the ruins of Gibeah, in the wilderness where their people had once been hunted to near extinction, the 600 men of Benjamin stood with their stolen brides. Some of them looked back toward their homeland, now nothing more than ashes and memories. Others looked forward, knowing that for better or worse, their people would live on. But at what cost? Chapter 11. The Final Warning. The dust had settled. The fires had burned out. The cries of war had faded into silence, but the land of Israel would never be the same. The streets of the cities were quiet, but not with peace, with the heavy weight of everything that had been lost. Entire families gone, a tribe nearly erased. The once proud warriors of Benjamin reduced to a handful of men who had been forced to steal their wives just to survive. And yet, life continued. Merchants reopened their shops. Farmers returned to their fields. Mothers rocked their children to sleep, whispering lullabies beneath the same sky that had once been filled with smoke. But no one spoke of Gibeah. No one spoke of the Levite. No one spoke of the woman whose death had set the nation aflame. She had been dismembered, her body scattered across Israel, her suffering used as a rallying cry for war. And now, she was forgotten. The Levite had vanished, slipping away into the night like a ghost. No one knew where he had gone. No one asked. Perhaps he had returned to his home. Perhaps he had walked into the wilderness, swallowed by the shadows. Perhaps in some way he had always been a shadow. And that is how this story ends. A story of betrayal, a story of war, a story of a nation devouring itself from within. The cycle of violence, the cost of unchecked rage, the horrifying consequences of a people who had abandoned righteousness, and then the final words. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. This is one of the darkest stories in the Bible, and yet almost no one talks about it. Why? Should more people know? Comment below and share your thoughts. If you want more eye-opening Bible mysteries, make sure to subscribe and check out our other videos. Until next time, stay curious.